I'm Judge Malcolm Reeves. I oversee criminal court for this district. I came here today with my daughter. The room fell into a kind of stunned paralysis. The applause lights above the stage flickered awkwardly, unsure whether to keep blinking. The audience, just seconds ago laughing along with the host's jabs, now sat frozen gilt, curling across their faces like smoke. The host, Felicity Rain, blinked 3 times in succession. Her usual smooth charm collapsed into a confused chuckle. Wait, you're a judge. Silence, a silence that felt like it might never end. How did it get here? And more importantly, what had everyone missed about the man in the plain grey suit? Let's go back 2 hours earlier. The studio was buzzing with its usual midweek energy. Felicity's team shuffled guests, fine-tuned lighting, adjusted camera angles. Interns raced with cue cards and bottled water. The vibe was upbeat today's theme. Funny people in unexpected places. The producers wanted something real and unfiltered. Felicity thrived on spontaneity, on dragging unscripted moments from the crowd, especially if they made people laugh. Her segments had gone viral before awkward dads at weddings, shy teachers with unexpected dance moves, even a plumber who'd ended up being a part-time opera singer, but today would be different. In the 5th row, near the edge of the seating section, sat a man who didn't belong. Not because of what he wore, just a clean, grey, slightly outdated suit, but because of how still he was. He didn't check his phone. He didn't whisper to his neighbor. He just sat with his hands folded, posture straight, eyes soft but observant. Next to him was a young girl, maybe 12. She wore a sky blue dress with little daisies on the hem and kept looking around the studio in quiet amazement. And that was what caught Felicity's eye. "Okay, folks," she said brightly into the mic, grinning as the audience whooped. "You know I love talking to people just minding their own business." She bounded off the stage with the confidence of a seasoned performer, walking straight into the crowd. As the cameraman followed her movements, people leaned in, hoping to be picked. She scanned, then pointed. "You," she said, laughing. "You, sir, with the tax return energy." The crowd chuckled. The man in the grey suit looked up slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. Felicity raised an eyebrow. "You look serious. What are you here for? Lost on your way to traffic court?" Laughter. The man kept his polite smile. Felicity took a seat next to him. "What's your name? Or should I just call you Officer Stern?" More laughter. A few people clapped. The man still didn't speak, just smiled. Eyes calm, composed. Okay, she grinned, turning to the camera. "This guy might be the most disciplined audience member we've ever had. I feel like if I cuss near him, I'll get grounded." A few oohs rippled through the crowd. Felicity, sensing momentum, stood again. "Well, I can't let this guy just sit there like the ghost of corporate America. Sir, come on down. Let's get to know each other. What's your story?" He stood. The girl beside him looked nervous. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear before gently taking her hand and walking toward the stage. The crowd was still laughing, but less now. The energy had shifted, ever so slightly. Once he reached the stage, Felicity handed him a mic. "Okay, mystery man. What's your name and what do you do?" And then everything changed. "I'm Judge Malcolm Reeves," he said, voice clear and even. "I oversee criminal court for this district. I came here today with my daughter. Gasps, audible ones. One woman covered her mouth. A man near the front looked down in shame. Even the laughter from backstage had stopped. Felicity's eyes darted across the studio. She reached for her usual charm, but it failed her. The man stood steady, calm, still smiling, but this time there was something else behind the smile. A quiet disappointment, a dignity that refused to bow. And now the world would learn why he came, why he stayed silent, and what he had to say next. What happens when a joke reveals more about the people laughing than the person being laughed at. The air was thick, almost unbearable. Felicity Rain stood frozen on stage, gripping her cue cards like a lifeline. The name Judge Malcolm Reeves echoed silently across the studio. No teleprompter could save her now. But Judge Reeves didn't gloat. He didn't shift his weight or raise his voice. He simply stood there beside his daughter, composed in the quiet storm his truth had just created. Felicity cleared her throat. "Well, Judge Reeves," she said, trying to sound upbeat. "I guess this is one of those don't judge a book by its cover moments." Huh. Some people laughed awkwardly. Others just stared. He nodded gently. "That's one way to look at it." Felicity attempted a chuckle. "I mean, who knew? We bring you on thinking we've got an accountant or something, and boom, you're the law itself." The judge smiled politely, but said nothing. She leaned in slightly, trying to regain control. "So, what brought you to the show today?" He glanced at the crowd before looking at his daughter, who stood clutching the edge of his coat. "Well, my daughter's been having a tough time lately," he said, voice calm and even. "I promised her a day of lightness, something fun. She's a fan of yours. I thought maybe laughter would help." Now there was no laughter, only silence, the kind that forces people to face themselves. Hours earlier that morning, Judge Malcolm Reeves had stood in front of his hallway mirror, adjusting his tie. It wasn't his usual black judicial robe. Today he wore the old grey suit he kept in the back of the closet, the one he wore to his first swearing-in. Modest but clean, respectable. His daughter Leela waited in the doorway. "Is this really the one you want to wear, Daddy?" she asked, gently wrinkling her nose. He smiled. "This one has good memories. It reminds me of where I started and who I still am." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think anyone will know you're a judge?" He shrugged. "Does it matter?" She tilted her head. "Maybe. Some people act different when they think you're important." He gave her a long look. "That's true. And that's exactly why it's good for them not to know." He didn't tell her that he had once watched a woman cross the street to avoid him in a hoodie, or that a bailiff once mistook him for the defendant's cousin when he wasn't wearing his robe. He didn't tell her about the lawyers who blinked in surprise when he walked into the courtroom, expecting someone else. No, today wasn't about bitterness. It was about joy, about keeping a promise to his little girl. So they came to the talk show, arriving early and taking their seats quietly in the crowd. She held his hand tightly the whole time. He laughed at a few jokes, smiled at others. When Felicity approached, he already sensed where it was going, but he stayed still. Not for pride, but for Leela. Back on stage, Felicity had started to fidget. "Well, Your Honor," she said, forced cheer bubbling in her voice. "You definitely fooled me. I guess I owe you an apology for the traffic court comment, huh?" Judge Reeves paused. The audience leaned in. "You don't owe me an apology," he said quietly. "You owe it to every man who's ever been judged by the cut of his suit." Before anyone asked his name, even the cameras seemed to pause. He turned to the audience. "We live in a world where assumptions can ruin lives. I've seen young men go to prison for how they looked before the truth ever had a chance to speak." The audience was no longer breathing shallow laughter. They were holding their breath. "I didn't come here to teach anyone a lesson," he said. "But if today becomes one, I hope it's a lesson in looking deeper, in letting people be more than your punchline." He turned to Felicity and smiled gently, not with anger, but quiet grace. "Thank you for letting me speak." He extended his hand. The moment she hesitated, unsure if she deserved to shake it, she took it anyway. The crowd, moved by something deeper than entertainment, began to applaud, not the clapping of humor, but of respect. Lila reached up and took her father's hand. Her eyes, wide and shining, met his. "You were amazing, Daddy." And for the first time that day, Judge Reeves let the mask of composure fall just a little. He smiled, this time not politely, this time with pride. The video hit the internet before Judge Reeves even made it back to his car. Someone in the audience had recorded the whole segment, the jokes, the silence, the moment of truth. Within hours, it had over 2 million views. By morning, it was everywhere. Talk show host mocks black man turns out he's a judge. When class meets dignity, the moment that silenced a crowd. This girl just wanted to laugh. Her father gave the nation a wake-up call. And yet, for Judge Malcolm Reeves, it was just another Wednesday. He didn't check social media. He didn't read the headlines. Instead, he made Lila breakfast, packed her lunch, and dropped her off at school like he always did. But that day, other parents stared longer than usual. Teachers approached with unsure smiles. One of them whispered, "Saw the video. You handled it with so much grace." He nodded in thanks, but said little. Grace wasn't new to him, it had been his lifelong armor. At the courthouse, things felt different. People who had once passed him in the halls without so much as eye contact now nodded, offered greetings, or looked away in guilt. A young black lawyer paused outside his chambers. "Judge Reeves," he said, almost reverently, "what you did, that meant something. To all of us." Judge Reeves motioned for him to come in. "Sit." The young man did. "I wasn't trying to go viral," Reeves said plainly. "That moment, it wasn't about me. It was about something far older and bigger." The lawyer leaned forward. "I know. That's why it meant so much." Reeves studied him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you watched it, what hurt the most?" The young man hesitated, then answered, "The laughter." Judge Reeves nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. "Yes," he said softly. "It's not the insult that cuts the deepest. It's knowing how easy it is for people to laugh at you until they realize who you are." Meanwhile, in a sleek building across town, Felicity Raines sat in a meeting room with her producers and PR team. "This is bad," one of them muttered. "It's not bad," said another, scrolling through the trending clips. "It's complicated. Some people think she was out of line. Others say she got what she deserved. But everyone's talking." Felicity sat still, jaw clenched. "Do we have a response ready?" Her publicist nodded. "We've drafted a formal apology, but we suggest something more personal. You need to address this on air. Sincerely." Felicity looked out the window, eyes heavy. She wasn't used to being the punchline. Her brand was edgy, yes, unfiltered, but this time, something felt different, colder. The laughter had died on her lips. The moment she saw the little girl, she replayed that moment in her head, the child's eyes, wide and hopeful, turning cautious as the jokes deepened. Felicity hadn't meant to be cruel. She never meant to be cruel. But cruelty doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it comes disguised as entertainment. That evening, at home, Judge Reeves sat on the edge of his bed while Leela brushed her teeth. Her laughter drifted from the bathroom as she sang a song about strawberries and soap. He closed his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was tired of the constant weight of representation, of being both man and message, of having to correct without condemning, speak without shouting, forgive without forgetting. The knock at his door was soft. He opened it to find his neighbor, Mrs. Halloway, an elderly white woman who'd lived across the street for 15 years, but never said much beyond nice weather. Now she stood with a small Tupperware of brownies and a hesitant look on her face. I just wanted to say, I saw you on that program, and I'm sorry for how that woman treated you. He looked at her for a long moment, then took the brownies with a gentle smile. Thank you, he said. That means more than you think. She nodded. You were very dignified. And then she added, more quietly, you reminded me of someone I should have gotten to know a long time ago. He didn't respond, but he didn't close the door either. Across the city, the stage where the moment happened had been cleared, but the echo remained, not of the joke, not of the silence, but of a voice, measured, calm, and deeply human, that had turned humiliation into truth, a voice that reminded the world that even in laughter, dignity matters, and tomorrow, the world would see what that voice had inspired next. The next episode of the Felicity Rain Show was different from the start. No colorful graphics, no peppy theme music, no crowd-pleasing jokes or viral stunt teasers, just Felicity, alone, sitting on a stool in the center of the stage, her hair pulled back, face bare of the usual heavy makeup, and her voice softer than the audience had ever heard it. Yesterday, something happened on this stage, she began, eyes fixed on the camera, and the world saw it. She paused, took a breath. I made a joke about a man in the crowd, a black man in a grey suit who, I assumed without a second thought, was someone unremarkable. I joked about traffic court. I joked about whether he had a real job. I thought I was being funny. Her throat tightened, but the man I mocked wasn't just anybody. He was Judge Malcolm Reeves, a respected criminal court judge, a father, a man who came here with his daughter for a light-hearted day. The screen behind her showed a still image, Judge Reeves standing beside Lila, both framed by the studio lights. Silent, proud. I've spent my career making people laugh, Felicity continued. But yesterday, I learnt something painful. That laughter, when pointed in the wrong direction, can hurt far more than silence ever could. A hush filled the studio. No applause sign flashed. No one dared speak. I can't undo the moment, she said, but I want to take full responsibility for it. Judge Reeves, if you're watching, I'm sorry. Not just for the words, but for the assumptions behind them. For treating your presence like a joke instead of the honor it was. She stood slowly, And to anyone who's ever sat in a crowd and felt smaller because someone like me decided your story didn't matter, I see you now. I'm listening, and I promise I'll do better. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. Judge Reeves didn't watch it live. He was in court, listening to a young defendant plead guilty to a theft charge. The boy was 17. Third arrest in 2 years. No father in the picture, no guidance, no chance. But after the session, his clerk pulled him aside. She apologized. On the show, everyone's talking about it. He nodded, unreadable. I see. But that night, long after Leela had gone to bed, he watched the clip alone, and for the first time in years, he felt something strange watching a talk show. Not anger, not disappointment. Something closer to hope. The days that followed were a blur. News. Channels dissected the moment endlessly. Pundits debated. Was Felicity sincere? Was this a turning point or just PR? But elsewhere, off camera, something far more meaningful was happening. Judge Reeves received hundreds of letters from students, teachers, grandmothers, fathers. One envelope arrived with a crayon drawing inside. Leela and her father holding hands under the words, "Real heroes were grey." Another letter came from a man, serving 15 years in prison. When you stood there and didn't flinch. I felt seen for the first time in a decade. And one came from a talk show host. It was handwritten, "Dear Judge Reeves, I hope you'll accept this letter, even if you can't accept my apology. I've spent the last few days listening, for the first time in a long while. You reminded me what dignity looks like, what patience can teach, what silence can expose. Thank you. Felicity Rain. He folded the letter and slid it into the drawer with his most important things, right beside his oath of office and the photo of his late wife. A week later, the courthouse was filled with cameras, not for scandal or trial, but for a special session. Community voices, dignity, justice, and the power of perception. Judge Reeves stood at the podium in a packed hall, facing a crowd, not laughing, not judging, just listening. My daughter and I came for a laugh, he said. Instead, we found a lesson, and maybe we gave one too. He paused, eyes scanning the room. The robe doesn't make me worthy of respect, nor does the title. What makes any of us worthy is the humanity we carry, whether it's visible to you or not. His voice was steady, strong, unshaken. There will always be people quick to judge, but I hope the next time you see a man in a plain suit, or a woman in a fast food uniform, or a kid walking home with his hood up, you ask yourself one thing before you laugh, before you assume, before you turn away. What don't I know about them? He stepped back to applause, not thunderous or performative, full of quiet reverence. Leela beamed from the front row, and somewhere, watching from home, Felicity Rain wiped away a tear she hadn't expected. 2 months had passed since the moment. On that talk show, the internet had moved on, as it always does. The headlines had faded, replaced by newer scandals, brighter trends, louder noise. But in quiet corners of the world, classrooms, courtrooms, family dinner tables, the story of the man in the grey suit lingered, like a whisper people couldn't forget. Not because it was sensational, but because it was human. Judge Reeves returned to his quiet routines, morning walks with Leela, early court sessions. weekend pancakes. He never spoke of the incident unless asked, and even then, only briefly. But those around him had changed. His courtroom, once an echo chamber of procedure, now felt like a living space of awareness. Prosecutors spoke with more care, defense attorneys with more respect. Even the defendants, many of whom had seen the clip, looked at him not as the system, but as a man. There was a new gravity in the room. One day, after a long sentencing hearing, a young man in cuffs turned back as the bailiff led him out. "Thanks, Judge," he muttered, "for talking to me like I was still worth something." Reeves nodded. He'd heard it before, but it never got old. At home, Lila had changed a dot. Where once she had been quiet and shy, she now spoke with more boldness, especially when people asked about her dad. "My father's a judge," she would say, "but he's more than that. He's the reason people think twice now." At school, one of her classmates said, "I saw your dad on YouTube." When Lila braced for teasing, the girl added softly, "I showed it to my mum." She cried. One rainy Friday afternoon, Judge Reeves received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a single note, no return address. "I watched that clip over and over. I was the man who used to laugh at those jokes. Now I'm the one trying to undo the damage I've done. Thank you for holding your silence that day. It was louder than anything I've ever heard." Reeves folded the letter slowly, thoughtfully, and placed it in his drawer with the others. That drawer was full now. Not of awards or honors, but of moments, private recognitions. Lives shifted. Minds changed. It wasn't the kind of legacy most men dream of, but it was the kind that lasts. Felicity Rain didn't stop her show, but she changed it in subtle, meaningful ways. The jokes still came, but now with sharper awareness. She introduced new segments, ones that invited ordinary people to speak. Stories from janitors, teachers, single mothers, veterans, immigrants. She listened more. She interrupted less. She reached out to Judge Reeves once more, not with cameras or scripts, but with a quiet invitation, a dinner, a real one. Just us, my treat. No mics, no headlines, just humans. He didn't respond for days. Then finally, a one-line reply. "Bring your daughter. I'll bring mine." The restaurant was modest, quiet, a place where no one brought fame, just hunger and humility. Lila and Felicity's daughter, Ellie, got along immediately, sharing fries and giggling over cartoons they both liked. Judge Reeves and Felicity sat across from one another, two people forever linked by a moment neither had expected. "I used to think silence was weakness," she said, gently stirring her tea. "Now I realize can be the loudest truth in the room." Reeves smiled. "Silence makes people fill in their own conscience. That's why it hurts. Not because of what's said, but because of what they hear in themselves." She looked at him. "Did you plan to say all that when I called you up?" He shook his head. "I planned to say nothing." "Then why did you?" He glanced at Lila, who was laughing with Ellie, dipping fries into her milkshake, "Because she was watching, and I wanted her to know that even when the world tries to shrink you, you still get to choose the size of your dignity." That night, as they parted, Felicity offered her hand. He shook it, not because she was famous, not because she had apologized, but because she had listened, really listened. Months later, Lila stood at the front of her sixth grade class, giving a presentation. The topic was, a person who inspires you. Most kids talked about celebrities or athletes. Lila stood with a photo of her father, gray suit, quiet smile, daughter by his side. My dad didn't yell or get mad when someone tried to make him small, she said. He didn't need to, because he knew who he was. She paused, voice steady. And now, so do I. The room clapped softly. Teacher wiped away a tear, and somewhere, maybe in a courtroom, maybe behind a desk, maybe inside someone's heart, a man in a plain suit stood, a little taller, not because the world saw him, but because he never stopped seeing himself. Thanks for watching. If you liked this story, please hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon to stay updated on my latest videos. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Your support means the world to me. See you in the next video.